Peace. I'm just letting a couple people join. I'm gonna just hop right into the reading. There were two women I wanted to honor today. One was Miss Tamika Johnson, a charter school of inquiry, and the other, um, even though I shouted her out the other day, I want to do it again because I just feel that her movement is so important. I think we all should just get behind it. We all know tons of people that have been affected with gun violence. Um, so just bear with me. I'm just looking to see if I can say her name. I believe her name is Camila, but I'm not. I don't want to say the wrong name because I didn't get to say her name last time. I was just speaking specifically on the Bury the Violence um, platform that she created, her and her son, I believe, and plenty others. My cousin, I was glad to see her there. My dear friends, you already know, Ellie, was very, very glad to see her there. Where am I? Okay, so I'm going down. I'm not going down, I'm scrolling down to find out what her name is. I hope your day going good though. Didn't get on here yesterday. It was pretty busy. Like I got a long ways to go. I don't even think that I be post. Sometimes this stuff posts on its own too though. Some of the stuff I do post myself. I hope y'all got your free copy of The Mind Over Money. Man, all you got to do is cover the shipping and handling on www.mindovermoneybook.com. Man, change your thinking, change your life. You feel me? Mind over money. Get it. Okay. Okay, there we go. What is her name? Not. I do not know her name. That's so bad. Karima. I believe her name is Karima. I'm shouting her out. Okay, so let me get back over here to this live. All right. Hey, Miss Lady, I ain't seen you in a while. Always good to see a sister or brother, man, from back in the day that I could go about 20 years back with. We ain't gonna say our age, but you know we only 26 right now. But I'm gonna go ahead and finish out this chapter of the birth of mass incarceration, because mass incarceration since the end of slavery, the day it ended, has been the birth of the new Jim Crow. The minute they push Jim Crow out, they continue to push this. This is the only way they can continue to make you a legal slave and get paid billions annually off the backs of our brothers and sisters, that they just keep subjecting to this, because 75% of the brothers and sisters in prison got way too much time, excessive time for stuff that they should already be home for. You know what I mean? So I'm gonna start where I left off, and I hope you're paying attention or sharing this. I just came back from the charter school of inquiry, and it was just a blessing to be there, man, to just hear the thoughts of what the children wanted, what they need, and what I could do to just help push them along further, man, you know? Okay, so the not so subtle message to working class whites was that their tax dollars were going to support special programs for blacks who most certainly did not did not deserve them. During this period, Nixon called for a war on drugs, an announcement that proved largely rhetorical as he declared illegal drugs public enemy number one without proposing dramatic shifts in drug policy. A backlash against blacks was clearly enforced, but no consensus had yet been reached regarding what racial and social order would ultimately emerge from these turbulent times. In his campaign for the presidency, Reagan mastered the excision of the language of race from conservative public discourse, and thus built on the success of earlier conservatives who developed a strategy of exploiting racial hostility or resentment for political gain without making explicit reference to race. Condemning welfare queens and criminal predators, he rolled into office with strong support of disaffected whites, poor and working class whites who felt betrayed by the Democratic Party's embrace of the civil rights agenda. As one political insider explained, Reagan's appeal derived primarily from the ideological fervor of the right wing of the Republican Party and the emotional distress of those who fear or resent the Negro, or who expect Reagan somehow to keep him in his place or at least echo their own anger and frustration. To great effect, Reagan echoed white frustration in race-neutral terms through implicit racial appeals. His colorblind rhetoric on crime, welfare, taxes, and states' rights was clearly understood by white and black voters as having a racial dimension through claims to that effect were impossible to prove. Although claims to that effect were impossible to prove. The absence of explicitly racist rhetoric afforded the racial nature of his coded appeals a certain plausible deniability. For example, when Reagan kicked off his presidential campaign at the annual Neshoba County Fair near Philadelphia, Mississippi, the town where 3 civil rights activists were murdered in 1964, he assured the crowd, "I believe in states' rights," and promised to restore to states and local governments the power that properly belonged to them. His critics promptly alleged that he was signaling a racial message to his audience, suggesting allegiance with those who resisted desegregation, but Reagan firmly denied it, forcing liberals into a position that would soon become familiar, arguing that something is racist, but finding it impossible to prove in the absence of explicitly racist language. Crime and welfare were the major themes of Reagan's campaign rhetoric. According to the Edsals, one of Reagan's favorite and most often repeated anecdotes was the story of a Chicago welfare queen with 80 names, 30 addresses, 12 Social Security cards, whose tax-free income alone is over $150,000. The term welfare queen became a not-so-subtle code for lazy, greedy black ghetto mother. The food stamp program, in turn, was a vehicle to let some fellow ahead of you buy a T-bone steak while you were standing in the checkout line with your package of hamburger. These highly racialized appeals targeted to poor and working-class whites were nearly always accompanied by vehement promises to be tougher on crime and to enhance the federal government's role in combating it. Reagan portrayed the criminals as a starting face, a face that belongs to a frightening reality of our time, the face of the human predator. Reagan's racially coded rhetoric and strategy proved extraordinarily effective, as 22% of all Democrats defected from the party to vote for Reagan. The defection rate shot up to 34% among those Democrats who believed civil rights leaders were pushing too fast. Once elected, Reagan's promise to enhance the federal government's role in fighting crime was complicated by the fact that fighting street crime has traditionally been the responsibility of state and local law enforcement. After a period of initial confusion and controversy regarding whether the FBI and the federal government should be involved in street crime, the Justice Department announced its intention to cut in half the number of specialists assigned to identify and prosecute white-collar criminals and to shift its attention to street crime, especially drug law enforcement. In October 1982, that's crazy, President Reagan officially announced his administration's war on drugs. At the time he declared this new war, less than 2% of the American public viewed drugs as the most important issue facing the nation. This fact was no deterrent to Reagan, for the drug war from the outset had little to do with public concern about drugs and much to do with public concern about race. By waging a war on drug users and dealers, Reagan made good on his promise to crack down on the racially defined others, the undeserving. Practically overnight, the budgets of federal law enforcement agencies soared. Between 1980 and 84, FBI anti-drug funding increased from $8 million to $95 million. Department of Defense anti-drug allocations increased from $33 million in 81 to, I don't know how they could even say that, but it looks like it says 1,042 million, which is not a number. So I'm going to say $1,042 million in 1991. During that same period, DEA anti-drug spending grew from $86 million to $1,026 million, and FBI anti-drug allocations grew from 38 to 181 million. By contrast, funding for agencies responsible for drug treatment, prevention, and education was dramatically reduced. The budget of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, for example, was reduced from 274 million to 57 million from 81 to 84. And anti-drug funds allocated to the Department of Education were cut from 14 million to 3 million. Determined to ensure that the new Republican majority would continue to support the extraordinary expansion of the federal government's law enforcement activities and that Congress would continue to fund it, the Reagan administration launched a media offensive to justify the war on drugs. Central to the media campaign was an effort to sensationalize the emergence of crack cocaine in inner city neighborhoods. Crack that could not even be, y'all know crack was not created here. It was placed here. It was forced here amongst us. And they the ones that did it. The government, I'm telling you. And you don't got to even believe me. You can go and look online. You can Google. Google University is amazing. You can learn more on Google today than you probably will learn in college right now. Where are we? War on drugs, central to the media campaign. Communities devastated by deindustrialization and skyrocketing unemployment. The media frenzy the campaign inspired simply could not have come at a worse time for African Americans. In the early 80s, just as the drug war was kicking off, inner city communities were suffering from an economic collapse. And they arrested those people that were suffering from that, put them in jail, whether they were hustling, whether they were using. But here they come with the heroin again, and now they want to give all of them this aid. But y'all never even corrected the humongous mistake and burden of putting these people in jail that were using. Even the drug dealers, y'all placed that here. It wasn't even the government. Y'all know y'all placed that shit here. Everybody that has been sentenced for a drug crime, I'm not saying should just get a slap on the wrist, but I'm telling you they should be allowed to come home. Why? The government placed it there. Ain't that double jeopardy? Come on, man. Crazy. I did that on purpose, man, to control our male population so that they can control the population. Crazy. It's forever just eating off of us. Pardon me. Let me get out my feelings, get back into my breathing. Yeah. The blue-collar factory jobs that had been plentiful in urban areas in the 50s and 60s has suddenly disappeared. Prior to 1970, inner-city workers with relatively little formal education could find industrial employment close to home. Globalization, however, helped to change that. Manufacturing jobs were transferred to multinational corporations away from American cities to countries that lack unions, where workers earn a small fraction of what is considered a fair wage in the United States. To make matters worse, dramatic technological changes revolutionized the workplace, changes that eliminated many of the jobs that less skilled workers once relied upon for their survival. Highly educated workers benefited from the pace of technological change and the increased use of computer-based technologies, but blue-collar workers often found themselves displaced in the sudden transition from an industrial to a service economy. The impact of globalization and deindustrialization was felt most strongly in Black inner-city communities, as described by William Julius Wilson in his book, When Work Disappears. The overwhelming majority of African Americans in the 70s lacked college educations and had attended racially segregated, underfunded schools lacking basic resources. Those residing in ghetto communities were particularly ill-equipped to adapt to the seismic changes taking place in the United States economy. They were left isolated and jobless. One study indicates that as late as 1970, more than 70% of all Blacks working in metropolitan areas held blue-collar jobs. Yet by 1987, when the drug war hit the high gear, the industrial employment of Black men had plummeted to 28%. Now think about this. They already been arresting us with the vagrancy laws from the day that they came with the bullshit Emancipation Proclamation. Then they came with guns, drugs, and dropped them off in our neighborhoods, influenced us to use them because we were kicked out of the houses when we were 18 because we were males, and a third of the males were in prison. A third of the males were out there going to, whether it was Vietnam or Korea or in the military, and the third was on the front lines of what we call the civil rights movement, but should have been a human rights movement. 70% of the backbone of that was Black women. But them Black women were feeling left out. Plus, the Black men that was in the street wasn't about shit. They was on that pimping shit. And it ain't but so much you're going to torture a woman or abuse a woman before she recognizes her worth and keeps it moving to something better, even if it's just on her own. So now you got that going on, and then they come with, hey, we're going to hit you off with this welfare, but the Black man can't be in your household. Even if he's 18 and he your child, he can't be in your household. So now you got the Black man outside on the streets. And again, I'm not blaming the sisters because it wasn't just the sisters. It was also some of the brothers, and it was also the government primarily. We got to keep getting back to this, man. The government has been doing this and targeting us. They ain't never came for the KKK, the Aryan Nation, the Ku Klux Klan, skinheads, none of them. But they keep coming for the black folk, right? Now, they come with child support. So remember, most of these people didn't even have an education, and now all of the jobs not only required an education, you needed to fit a certain description. So think about that. You got all of the people that were related to people or that looked like the people that were against us that got hired with all of these jobs that can pass and take that information. You know, a lot of people don't get jobs just by filling out that application. It was word of mouth. Somebody that you know told you or put up a word for you and told you to put in that application. Well, they were telling their people, and our people were being disbanded even to this day. You don't see many of us in all of these hierarchies. And if a lot of people want to argue with me and talk about, oh, no, it's more opportunity now than it was before, blah, 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 blah. I'm not saying that there's not hope. I'm not saying there's not opportunity. I'm telling you that we still own the exact same amount of wealth that we owned in 1865. So you tell me, how much fucking progress do you think that is? Less than 1/2 of 1% of the nation's wealth we own. But we the biggest consumers, which means we got the biggest buying power in the world, specifically in the United States. That is the reason why there is no that is one of the reasons that contributed to a lot of these men not having respect for their mothers, for their sisters, for the sisters that they see in the street, and don't even know how to treat a woman, don't even know to open the door for a woman, don't even know to, you know what I mean, to treat her, to court her, to earn her trust. It's just all instant gratification now. Delayed gratification a little bit better. I'd rather put up a little bit now to make more later than to just get the materialistic stuff that I want now. We all are going to get old, hopefully one day. And if you're not planning for that right now, I don't care about no club, I don't care about no weed, I don't care about no liquor, I don't care about no canal side. None of that is even for us. I'm telling y'all, everything you doing is going to benefit the people that keep trying to push us out. Y'all see what's going on with the Langfield. They got the slow stroll rolling through here. Like, for what? Why would you want people to ride through the worst neighborhoods in the city of Buffalo, but they can't ride through North Buffalo? They ain't riding through Cheektowaga or Amherst. I hope Duncan Kirkwood do get 300 runners. I'm going to run with him, even though I don't want to run. I'm just going to hop in just because I tend to be ignorant sometimes. I'm just going to admit it. I don't like how people treat us, and I'm one of them people that will stand up and do my part. So let me get back to reading, man. The new manufacturing jobs that opened during this time period were generally located in the suburbs. The growing spatial mismatch of jobs had a profound impact on African Americans trapped in ghettos. A study of urban black fathers found that only 28% had access to an automobile. The rate fell to 18% for those living in ghetto areas. I want to get back to that because when it came with the child support, now, hey, you can't drive if you don't pay this on time or if you ain't paid in full with your child support. Well, now you've limited us specifically to jobs and opportunities because, as you know, some of the best jobs are not even in the city. They're on the outskirts. Well, how the fuck we going to get to the outskirts where there's no motherfucking public transportation? Even if it is, you might have to commute 2 hours or an hour to get to and from the buses and the trains. Ain't nobody really trying to do all of that, man. And then what ends up happening is somehow, some way, they get frustrated, man, and they go back out here to these streets. That's just waiting to sweep them up, whether being murdered by the next man or the government coming after that ass, man, and locking their ass up, man, and making them legal slaves all over again. I just want y'all to know, man, that is a mass incarceration is what's been holding us back. Think about this. If they let out 75% of the brothers that have spent the last 10, 15, 20 years in prison or more, even the ones that just did the last 2, 3, 4, let them out. And let them go holler at the orange man in chief to talk about prison reform and let them utilize some of those ideas that they've learned from their experience. I guarantee you it'll be a whole revert. The funny thing is you could boost the economy up in a matter of months if you did it. I'm not saying everybody gonna cooperate. I'm just saying, come on, man. Y'all think it's because people was lazy? They've been telling y'all that we've been lazy for the last 400-500 years. But did y'all forget that we put in work that we were never compensated for? We've been at the bottom rung of everything, and it wasn't by chance. And it wasn't just because we was lazy. You know what I mean? So don't do that, and don't believe that. Stop believing what people are telling you and contest it. Contest your religions. Contest everything. I don't care if your mama, your daddy, your pastor. I don't care about none of that. contest everything. You a grown-ass individual. You got the right to use your brain. Your most powerful asset is your mind. Strengthen it. Use it. You know why they want you to go to work? Why they don't? They teach you to go to school to get a job, to go work for somebody else. That's slave labor. You working for somebody for the rest of your life. Who the fuck want to keep going to work week after week, week after week, week after week to just get a paycheck to just get by? You just want to get by? That sums up your ambition? Come on, man. Don't your children deserve better? I ain't saying anything wrong with having a job. I'm saying there's definitely something wrong with just having a job. That's what I'm telling you. And no, I don't have one. And no, I'm not looking for one. Unless it falls in the lines of what I'm doing and it doesn't prevent me from doing the other stuff that I'm doing outside of a job to build income. So, damn. Women fare somewhat better during this period because the social service sector in urban areas, which employs primarily women, was expanding at the same time manufacturing jobs were evaporating. The fraction of black men who moved into so-called pink-collar jobs like nursing or clerical work was negligible. The decline in legitimate employment opportunities among inner-city residents increased incentives to sell drugs, most notably crack cocaine. Crack is a pharmacologically almost identical. Crack is pharmacologically almost identical to powder cocaine. It comes from powder cocaine. But it has been converted into a form that can be vaporized and inhaled for a faster, more intense, though shorter, high using less of the drug, making it possible to sell small doses at more affordable prices. At the end of the day, man, they come from the same thing. The same law should apply to the same thing because it ain't no motherfucking difference except for the highs they were speaking about. Crack hit the streets in 1985, a few years after Reagan's drug war was announced, leading to a spike in violence as drug markets struggle to stabilize and anger the frustration associated with joblessness boiled. Y'all don't think it's just a coincidence that he started a campaign on the war on drugs and then crack hit? You knew that drugs was coming because you probably implemented the drugs. Yeah, your organization and everybody you was affiliated with. That's crazy. It wasn't just so much that people wanted to do that, but what was these men going to do that couldn't live in the house? Not only because and by this time there have been a lot of men that weren't being fathers, whether they were being killed in the war or whether they were in prison or whether they were being in prison for being on the front lines or being killed on the front lines to stand up for our human rights during the civil rights movement. That was the reason why there was fathers not in the home. And then they came with new rules and regulations to make sure that you didn't have to even look at a man anymore. You know what I mean? It wasn't much today. But back then, it was like, it's nothing. I told you, I know a woman that's getting $3,200 a month from the government for her children. They labeled her children as whatever, and she gets $3,200 a month. $3,200. And I'm saying that's just one woman I know. You think any men out here are getting $3,200 a month from the government? And it's a lot of women that think that it's really easy to be a man. And I know it ain't hard to be. I know it's hard to be a woman. I could never even be in those shoes because I'm a man. And I only can empathize to a degree because I don't even know. Y'all go through a lot of changes in your bodies. And don't think I'm putting women down. I'm trying to get y'all to bridge the gap. This is why it's a lot of men not capable of being able to do the things that you would expect for them to do because they were never even given that opportunity. They were never taught the things that girls are taught. Girls are taught from their mothers how to be women. If the men ain't around, as much as a woman may want to, and she can teach them certain things, how to tie a tie, she can even teach them how to treat a woman. But she might not be able to move him in a way that a man will be able to move him, just like a man may not be able to move a little girl the way a woman will be able to move her. You know what I mean? Where was I? I'm going to read that statement again. Crack hit the streets in 1985, a few years after Reagan's drug war was announced. Just too much coincidence, right? Ain't no such thing as coincidence either. Leading to a spike in violence as drug markets struggled to stabilize and the anger and frustration associated with joblessness boiled. Joblessness and crack swept inner cities precisely at the moment that a fierce backlash against the civil rights movement was manifesting itself through the war on drugs. No one should ever attempt to minimize the harm caused by crack cocaine and the related violence. As David Kennedy correctly observes, crack blew through America's poor black neighborhoods like the four horsemen of the apocalypse, leaving behind unspeakable devastation and suffering. We are all victims of that traumatization. We are all victims of the traumatization of slavery, of Jim Crow, and definitely mass incarceration, men and women alike. But you don't see them coming to our aid, but they come into the aid of these victims or these users of heroin. I ain't going for it, man. I'm gonna call it like I see it, man. We ain't gotta agree. We could agree to disagree. No one should ever attempt to minimize the harm caused by crack cocaine and the related violence. As David Kennedy correctly observes, crack blew through America's poor black neighborhoods like the four horsemen of the apocalypse, leaving behind unspeakable devastation and suffering. As a nation, though, we had a choice about how to respond. Some countries faced with this rising drug crime or seemingly intractable rates of drug abuse and drug addiction chose the path of drug treatment, prevention, and education, or economic investment in crime-ridden communities like Canada. And I want to say there was others, but I know that Canada even still allows some of their prisoners or the majority of prisoners access to education because they know that education is the equilibrium and the balance to wipe out recidivism. And when you do that, you get more people putting into the economy and contributing to the community, which makes for a safer and a community that's going to thrive in the long term, for longevity. You know what I mean? Where am I? Prevention, education, economic investment. Okay. Portugal, for example, responded to persistent problems of drug addiction and abuse by decriminalizing the possession of all drugs and redirecting the money that would have been spent putting drug users in cages into drug treatment and prevention. I think it costs like $8,000 a month to house a prisoner in the United States. And it costs $5,000, I believe, a semester, or maybe it's a year. I think it's a semester though, to educate them in college, which would be cheaper. Come on, and the government noticed. They got the statistics. They know it. But the whole hustle is to keep slaves, and they're gonna keep trying to point out ways and fashions to keep us the slaves. Mm-hmm. 10 years later, Portugal reported that rates of drug abuse and addiction had plummeted, and drug-related crime was on the decline as well. Numerous paths were available to us as a nation in the wake of the crack crisis, yet for reasons traceable largely to racial politics and fear-mongering, we chose war. Conservatives found they could finally justify an all-out war on an enemy that had been racially defined years before. Almost immediately after crack appeared, the Reagan administration leaped at the opportunity to publicize crack cocaine in an effort to build support for its drug war. In October 1985, the DEA sent Robert Strutman to serve as the director of its New York City office and charged him with the responsibility of shoring up public support for the administration's new war. Strutman developed a strategy for improving relations with the news media and sought to draw journalists' attention to the spread of crack cocaine in inner city communities. Before I continue reading, remember that the media is what the rest of the world is seeing, black men and women being arrested and brutalized for all of these drugs that were placed in the neighborhoods by the government. So notice that they sent this guy Strutman to build this relation with the media. And now, I know y'all probably think that the media that you watch is just for your local television. And it's not. The same shit that they saying to you is being said all across the country with all of the other local radio TV stations. Also on the radio as well. You know what I mean? And if you don't believe me, man, do some research. It's not hard. And I'm not the smartest person, so if I could do it, I'm thinking the average person can do it. I'm willing to bet that the average person can, because people have been doing it before I ever got started. You know? That's crazy. As Stutman, Stutman, recounted years later, the agents would hear me give hundreds of presentations to the media as I attempted to call attention to the drug scourge. I wasted no time in pointing out the DEA's new accomplishments against the drug traffickers. The biggest drug trafficker was the government. In order to convince Washington, I needed to make it a national issue, and quickly. I began a lobbying effort, and I used the media. The media were only too willing to cooperate because, as far as the New York media was concerned, crack was the hottest combat reporting story to come along since the end of the Vietnam War. The strategy bore fruit. In June 1986, Newsweek declared crack to be the biggest story since Vietnam and Watergate. And in August of that year, Time magazine termed crack the issue of the year. Thousands of stories about the crack crisis flooded the airwaves and newsstands, and the stories had a clear racial subtext. The articles typically featured black crack whores, crack babies, and gangbangers, reinforcing already prevalent racial stereotypes of black women as irresponsible, selfish welfare queens and black men as predators, part of an inferior and criminal subculture. See how they do us? And they've been doing it. People keep talking about forgive them and want to hold hands and kumbaya. Fuck all that shit. Get on some real shit. Fuck that kumbaya. I ain't about to forgive none of this bullshit. I ain't gonna say we can't get past it, but I ain't gonna just forgive it. Man, I'm gonna recognize it, because as soon as you forgive, you forget. And if you forget, you won't remember the lesson that's gonna empower you to never let the shit happen again. Fuck that kumbaya shit. Who was I? I get so caught up, I really lose my place. Okay. Welfare queen, inferior, blah, blah, blah. When two popular sports figures, Len Bias and Don Rogers, died of cocaine overdoses in June 1986, the media erroneously reported their deaths as caused by crack, contributing to the media firestorm and groundswell of political activity and public concern relating to the new demon drug, crack cocaine. The bonanza continued into 1989 as the media continued to disseminate claims that crack was an epidemic, a plague, instantly addictive, and extraordinarily dangerous, claims that have now been proven false or highly misleading. Between October 1988 and 89, the Washington Post, October 1988 and October 1989, the Washington Post alone ran 1,565 stories about the drug scourge. Richard Harwood, and if they did it, believed that all these other news carriers did as well. Richard Harwood, the Post's ombudsman, eventually admitted that the paper had lost a proper sense of perspective due to such hyperbole epidemic. He said that politicians are doing a number on people's heads. They've been doing it for years, hundreds of years. Sociologist Craig Rainemerin and Harry Levine later made a similar point. Crack was a godsend to the right. It could not have appeared at a more politically opportune moment. In September 1986, the media frenzy at full throttle, the House passed legislation that allocated $2 billion to the anti-drug crusade, required the participation of the military in narcotics control efforts, allowed the death penalty for some drug-related crimes, and authorized the admission of some illegally obtained evidence in drug trials. Illegally obtained evidence in drug trials. Later that month, the Senate proposed even tougher anti-drug legislation, and shortly thereafter, the president signed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986 into law. Among other harsh penalties, the legislation included mandatory minimum sentences for the distribution of cocaine, including far more severe punishment for distribution of crack associated with blacks than powder cocaine associated with whites. Few criticisms of the legislation could be heard en route to enactment. One senator insisted that crack had become a scapegoat, distracting the public's attention from the true causes of our social ills, arguing, if we blame crime on crack, our politicians are off the hook. Forgotten are the failed schools, the malign welfare programs, the desolate neighborhoods, the wasted years. Only crack is to blame. One is tempted to think that if crack did not exist, someone somewhere would have received a federal grant to develop it. Critical voices, however, were lonely ones. Congress revisited drug policy in 1988. The resulting legislation was once again extraordinarily punitive, this time extending far beyond traditional criminal punishments and including new civil penalties for drug offenders. The new Anti-Drug Abuse Act authorized public housing authorities to evict any tenant who allows any form of drug-related criminal activity to occur on or near public housing premises, and eliminated many federal benefits, including student loans, for anyone convicted of a drug offense. The act also expanded use of the death penalty for serious drug-related offenses and imposed new mandatory minimums for drug offenses, including a 5-year mandatory minimum for simple possession of cocaine base, with no evidence of intent to sell. Remarkably, the The penalty would apply to first-time offenders. The severity of this punishment was unprecedented in the federal system. Until 1988, 1 year of imprisonment had been the maximum for possession of any amount of any drug. Members of the Congressional Black Caucus were mixed in their assessment of the new legislation. Some believed the harsh penalties were necessary. Others convinced that the laws were biased and harmful to African Americans. Ultimately, the legislation passed by an overwhelming margin, 346 to 11. 6 of the negative votes came from the Congressional Black Caucus. The war on drugs proved popular among key white voters, particularly whites who remained resentful of black progress, civil rights enforcement, and affirmative action. Beginning in the 1970s, researchers found that racial attitudes, not crime rates or likelihood of victimization, are an important determinant of white support for get tough on crime and anti-welfare measures. Among whites, those expressing the highest degree of concern about crime also tend to oppose racial reform, and their punitive attitudes toward crime are largely unrelated to their likelihood of victimization. Whites, on average, are more punitive than blacks, despite the fact that blacks are far more likely to be victims of crime. Rural whites are often the most punitive, even though they are least likely to be crime victims. The war on drugs, cloaked in race-neutral language, offered whites opposed to racial reform a unique opportunity to express their hostility toward blacks and black progress without being exposed to the charge of racism. Reagan's successor, President George Bush Sr., did not hesitate to employ implicit racial appeals, having learned from the success of other conservative politicians that subtle negative references to race could mobilize poor and working-class whites who once were loyal to the Democratic Party. Bush's most famous racial appeal, the Willie Horton ad, featured a dark-skinned black man, a convicted murderer who escaped while on a work furlough and then raped and murdered a white woman in her home. The ad blamed Bush's opponent, Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis, for the death of the white woman because he approved the furlough program. For months, the ad played repeatedly on network news stations and was the subject of incessant political commentary. Though controversial, the ad was stunningly effective. It destroyed Dukakis' chances of ever becoming president. Once in the Oval Office, Bush stayed on message, opposing affirmative action and aggressive civil rights enforcement and embracing the drug war with great enthusiasm. In August 1989, President Bush characterized drug use as the most pressing problem facing the nation. Shortly after, the New York Times and CBS News poll reported that 64% of those polled, the highest percentage ever recorded, now thought that drugs were the most significant problem in the United States. The surge of public concern did not correspond to the dramatic shift in illegal drug activity, but instead was the product of a carefully orchestrated political campaign. The level of public concern about crime and drugs was only weakly correlated with actual crime rates, but highly correlated with political initiatives, campaigns, and partisan appeals. The shift to a general attitude of toughness toward problems associated with communities of color began in the 1960s, when the gains and goals of the civil rights movement began to require real sacrifices on the part of white Americans, and conservative politicians found they could mobilize white racial resentment by vowing to crack down on crime. By the late 1980s, however, not only conservatives played leading roles in the Get Tough movement, spouting the rhetoric once associated only with segregationists, Democratic politicians and policymakers were now attempting to wrest control of the crime and drug issues from Republicans by advocating stricter anti-crime and anti-drug laws, all in an effort to win back the so-called swing voters who were defecting to the Republican Party. If you don't know that Bill and Hillary Clinton locked up more black men and women than anyone ever in history here in the United States. Damn near more than slavery, I believe. And I mean, people think these people are so cool. These people called us super predators. Super predators. When the super predator has been a goddamn government since the beginning of the building of this so-called fucking country. Somewhat ironically, these new Democrats were joined by virulent racists, most notably the Ku Klux Klan, which announced in 1990 that it intended to join the battle against illegal drugs by becoming the eyes and ears of the police. Progressives concerned about racial justice in this period were most silent about the war on drugs, preferring to channel their energy toward defense of affirmative action and other perceived gains of the civil rights movement. In the early 1990s, resistance to the emergence of a new system of racialized social control collapsed across the political spectrum. A century earlier, a similar political dynamic had resulted in the birth of Jim Crow. In the 1890s, populists buckled under the political pressure created by the Redeemers, who had successfully appealed to poor and working class whites by proposing overtly racist and increasingly absurd Jim Crow laws. Now, a new racial caste system, mass incarceration, was taking hold, as politicians of every stripe competed with each other to win the votes of poor and working class whites whose economic status was precarious at best and who felt threatened by racial reforms. As had happened before, former allies of African Americans, as much as conservatives, adopted a political strategy that required them to prove how tough they could be on them, the dark-skinned pariahs. A pariah is someone that stands out. It could be a fish as well, but you know. The results were immediate. As law enforcement budgets exploded, so did prison and jail populations. In 1991, the Sentencing Project reported that the number of people behind bars in the United States was unprecedented in world history, that 1/4 of young African American men were now under the control of the criminal justice systems, legal slaves. Despite the jaw-dropping impact of the Get Tough movement on the African American community, neither the Democrats nor the Republicans revealed any inclination to slow the pace of incarceration. To the contrary, in 1992, presidential candidate Bill Clinton vowed that he would never permit any Republican to be perceived as tougher on crime than he. True to his word, just weeks before the critical New Hampshire primary, Clinton chose to fly home to Arkansas to oversee the execution of Ricky Ray Rector, a mentally impaired black man who had so little conception of what was about to happen to him that he asked for the dessert from his last meal to be saved for him until the morning. After the execution, Clinton remarked, "I can be nicked a lot, but no one can say I'm soft on crime." Yeah, President Clinton, your favorite president, right? Yeah, fuck out of here. Once elected, Clinton endorsed the idea of a federal 3 strikes and you're out law, which he advocated in his 1994 State of the Union address to enthusiastic applause on both sides of the aisle. The $30 billion crime bill sent President Clinton in August 1994 was hailed as a victory for the Democrats, who were able to wrest this crime issue from the Republicans and make it their own. The bill created dozens of new federal capital crimes, mandated life sentences for some 3-time offenders, and authorized more than $16 billion for state prison grants and expansion of state and local police forces. Far from resting the emergence of the new caste system, Clinton escalated the drug war beyond what conservatives had imagined possible a decade earlier. As the Justice Policy Institute has observed, the Clinton administration's tough on crime policies resulted in the largest increases in federal and state prison inmates of any president in American history. Clinton eventually moved beyond crime and capitulated to the conservative racial agenda on welfare. This move, like his Get Tough rhetoric and policies, was part of a grand strategy articulated by the New Democrats to appeal to the elusive white swing voters. In so doing, Clinton, more than any other president, created the current racial undercast. He signed the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, which ended welfare as we know it, replacing aid to families with dependent children with a block grant to states called Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, imposed a 5-year lifetime limit on welfare assistance, as well as permanent lifetime ban on eligibility for welfare and food stamps for anyone convicted of a felony drug offense, including simple possession of marijuana. But you see how much the marijuana is popping up all over. And I keep telling y'all, a lot of y'all keep like, oh no, weed don't do that to you. Weed don't do that to you. Yo, listen, the government got their hands in on the weed. They got the weed jumping and they doing new shit to that weed. You better leave that shit alone. When your ass humped over and you looking like you doped out, you going to be thinking like, damn, John said this shit 5, 6, 7 years ago. I'm telling you before this shit really take place. Because there's a lot of people I know that smoke bud, and I be seeing them looking zoned out like they on something else. And they smoking bud. That's all they smoke, because I know I done seen them for 20 years smoking the same shit. I'm telling you, leave that shit alone. Oh, it's nice and it's fun, but that's how they keep your mind occupied. If you're going to smoke and you're going to drink, you ain't going to think about going up to your kid's school to read. to make sure that they participate in the helping assist the teacher aides and the volunteers. It's 40, 50 kids in these classes, man. They need some presence. They need somebody to come up there to just give them a hand. You ain't got to go every day, but man, what would happen if you decided to go volunteer at your children's school for 2-3 hours a week, 1 or 2 days a week? What kind of impact would that have on our future? Because that's what the children are. And I ain't just going off the song, but that's a fact. The children are the future. If you're not investing in them, if all you're doing is telling them to go do this and go do that, and you ain't teaching them or rearing them to do well, what you think gonna happen? When they turn 18, you think you're just gonna turn them loose and they just gonna be automatically successful? It comes from being nurtured from a babe, 5, 6, 7, 8. You should be telling them the shit that you want to tell them at 18, at 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm telling you now. Everybody else is doing it but our community. Where was I? Okay. Despite claims that these radical policy changes were driven by fiscal conservatism, i.e. the desire to end big government and slash budget deficits, the reality is that government was not reducing the amount of money devoted to the management of the urban poor. It was radically altering what the funds would be used for. The dramatic shift toward punitiveness resulted in a massive reallocation of public resources. By 1996, the penal budget doubled the amount that had been allocated to AFDC or food stamps. Similarly, funding that had once been used for public housing was being redirected to prison construction. During Clinton's tenure, Washington slashed funding for public housing by $17 billion, a reduction of 61%, and boosted corrections by $19 billion, an increase of 171%, effectively making the construction of prisons the nation's main housing program for the urban poor. If you just look at an example in Cali, they've built 80 prisons in one school, I believe, in the last decade. And what I mean by school, I'm talking about university or college. One. But they built 80 prisons. I'm quite sure New York State did the same, even though they might have built a few schools or put some money towards the schools. I'm willing to bet it's about 200-300 prisons in New York State alone. And I mean medium, minimum, maximum, county. Oh yeah, it's definitely well over 200-300 prisons in New York State. This prison's being built as we speak right now in New York State. Clinton did not stop there. Determined to prove how tough he could be on them, Clinton also made it easier for federally assisted public housing projects to exclude anyone with a criminal history, an extraordinarily harsh step in the midst of a drug war aimed at racial and ethnic minorities. In his announcements of the One Strike and You're Out initiative, Clinton explained, from now on, the rule for residents who commit crime and peddle drugs should be 1 strike and you're out. The new rule promised to be the toughest admission and eviction policy that HUD has implemented. Thus, for countless poor people, particularly racial minorities targeted by the drug war, public housing was no longer available, leaving many of them homeless, locked out not only of mainstream society, but out of their homes. So you don't lock them out of mainstream society, jobs, and a decent place to live. What the fuck do you think they was going to do? And their education is limited. You know what the fuck they was going to do. That's why you set them fucking laws so that you can lock motherfuckers up forever in a day. That's why I seen somebody put a video up. Motherfuckers got like a 60-inch flat screen, and it's a touch screen in prison. Now, again, I'd have been about 12, 15 prisons. I don't know the exact number. I just know I've been to a whole bunch from the east to the west coast. First of all, I've never seen that, right? Secondly, they making y'all real comfortable. Y'all getting real comfortable. I know personally, I have relatives that have been in and out of jail. When I say in and out of jail, I don't mean just like they did 5 years, came out for a little while, and went back. No, I mean, I know people that have come home and are setting records. 28 days, 21 days, 7 days, 3 days, 2 days, consecutively, and going right back to prison because I believe they feel more comfortable there than they do here because they don't know how to operate here. They're not being taught how to hop back into society and adapt and change. They're not being prepared to do this before they leave, so you leaving them with the exact same problem they got when they left. How are they supposed to come back and change that when all they've been taught since they was there is how to be more of a criminal and commit more crime? You know? It don't take a rocket scientist. The law and order perspective, first introduced during the peak of the civil rights movement by rabid segregationists, have become nearly, I don't even know how to say this, hegemonic, Hegemonic, 2 decades later. By the mid-1990s, no serious alternatives to the war on drugs and Get Tough movement were being entertained in mainstream. Oh, we're on our last paragraph, finally. Political discourse. Once again, in response to a major disruption, let me make sure I got that page. Okay. What did I say? Movement were being entertained in mainstream political discourse. Once again, in response to a major disruption in the prevailing racial order, this time civil rights gains of the 1960s, a new system of racialized social control was created by exploiting the vulnerabilities and racial resentments of poor and working class whites. More than 2 million people found themselves behind bars at the turn of the 21st century, and millions more were relegated to the margins of mainstream society, banished to a political and social space not unlike Jim Crow, where discrimination in employment, housing, and access to education was perfectly legal, and where they could be denied the right to vote. The system functioned relatively automatically, and the prevailing system of racial meanings, identities, and ideologies already seemed natural. 90% of those admitted to prison for drug offenses in many states were Black or Latino, yet the mass incarceration in the communities of color was explained in race-neutral terms, in adaptation to the needs and demands of the current political climate. The new Jim Crow was born, mass incarceration. I was speaking with an educator today, and he was speaking to me about, to the group of us, it was 4 of us, a queen and another brother, myself, and a gentleman. And he was saying how a lot of the kids that he might not see them for like a month, 3 months, 4 months, and when they come back, they'll be like, yeah, I was on vacation. The way we are responding to the things that are going on is like it's natural, and we just accept it. We have to stop accepting this feeding this line of bullshit. That's not what it is, man. I don't ever want kids to be thinking it's natural to go to jail. It's not. It's not even a place to be. Ain't nothing cool about that. Jail, prison, none of that shit. All that earning stripes, listen, you breathing, you earning stripes just breathing if you Black. This is how you earn your stripes. It ain't stripes that you got to compete against the next man, kill the next man for. Man, we have to protect ourselves, and we have to love ourselves. It's hard to stand out amongst the crowd when everybody telling you, you know what, if you ain't got no money, you know what I mean, they not fucking with you. A lot of fellas is fucked up right now. They caught between what they would like to do and what they feel that they need to do because of the pressure that they see. It's a lot of women that'll never give the men that's really interested in them, never treat them well. They won't give them a day of time because they so concentrated on these fuck boys and drug dealers. And some of them are actually great people personally, but this is their lifestyle, and they think that this is what it is. They be listening to this music and they honor this shit like this is what we supposed to live for. But they ain't seen none of these people retired, man, doing nothing amazing. I'm talking about retired. Ain't got to get up to go to work, do nothing. Ain't got to sell a package of nothing. Could take a trip whenever the fuck they want. Could go shopping wherever the fuck they want. Why would you want to limit yourself to that? Ain't no guarantee of life after death. Man, all we know is this life here. I don't care what your religious affiliation is. None of that shit. You only know what you know. A motherfucker can't tell you about what's beyond what they can see and what they know. That shit that's going on when you die, worry about that shit when you die. But right here, you better worry about living and not just living week to week. I'm not saying you got to have the most expensive anything. You know what I mean? I got a friend on here from Florida, and I'm going to steal something that he said that I feel. A lot of people be wondering, like, why I don't just, sometimes I get fly, sometimes I treat myself and make myself feel great, you know what I mean? But why I don't, like get fly, dress fly, and do certain things, maybe grab a chain or, you know what I'm saying, throw some rims on a V or something like that. Because I'm humble enough to appreciate myself and not to have to rely on the rest of the world appreciating me for the materials that I possess. Fuck the materialistic shit. You can't take none of that shit with you when you die. And people are not going to remember you for your fucking car. They're not going to remember you for your fly ass gear. They'll say that you was fly, and that's cool, but that's all you want them to remember you by? Man, thousands of years from now, I want to be like some of the kings and queens in Egypt and Kemet, and people still talking about the effect that I had on them, impacting and empowering the community. Even if it ain't me, even if I can influence a person to become that person, or a group of people, or a multitude, which I would hope to do. That's what it's about, man. That's more valuable than motherfucking gold, silver, all that bullshit. You know what I mean? So I'm gonna end this here. I hope your today is great. I hope your tomorrow is greater. Get focused, man. If you ain't bought yourself a book, and I ain't talking about none of that iceberg slim, none of that shit. Yo, go buy Powernomics. Go buy Mind Over Money. You can order Mind Over Money for like $5 or $6 right now. It'll be shipped directly to your door. You know what I mean? I'm gonna put the link up after I get off of the live. You know what I'm saying? Get Think and Grow Rich. Get How to Win and Influence Friends. Get Race First. Get some shit that's gonna put some power into you that you can go and share with someone else. And don't just read it because you want to read it. Read it like you got to teach it to somebody else. Read it and inhale it and embrace it and digest it like you have to teach it to someone else. The reason I get on here and I say this is to inspire you to do it, not for you to just listen to me. It's okay to listen to me, but I am your equal. I'm not doing anything greater than you or lesser than you. I might be doing something that you may be scared to do, but I'm showing you that it's okay. It's all right to be scared. It's okay to have a little fear. It'll keep you humble. It'll keep you safe and it'll keep you alive. You know what I mean? But it ain't okay to not try. Try something new. You keep doing that same thing and you ain't getting no further into what you want to get. Do something new. Do something new. I challenge you to do what I'm doing and reach out to these children and give back. I guarantee you, it won't take you long to see how fast you have an impact on children that don't even know you. I met about 30 children today that I seen about 3 or 4 of them because they all live near where I live. We all live in the same neighborhood. So now when they see me, it's like Mr. John. If they need help with their homework, you know what I mean? Or if they having a problem that they just need to talk to somebody about. Man, at least they got someone they can talk to. You know how many kids don't get to see their fathers? Partially because some of these fathers ain't stepping up to be fathers. And partially because some of these mothers are using the children like pawns and don't allow the children to see their father. We got to get past that shit, y'all, on both sides. Facts. But hey, black people, you significant. I love you. The whole world loves you. That's why some of these people hate you so much. Be your best. Don't do what others is doing unless it's something that's positive and it's giving an impact on those that's coming behind you or that's watching you. Even there's people older than you that's watching you. If I can do it, man, you could do it. I believe in you. I believe in us. Buy black, think black, support black. Black is beautiful. Peace.